In the vast, unyielding expanse of eastern Ukrainian agricultural lands, a chilling tableau unfolded on a recent winter afternoon. The clock had just struck 1300 hours, and under a sky of stark clarity, visibility stretched unimpeded across flat, seemingly innocuous farmlands that met the horizon in an unbroken line. It was into this deceptively tranquil setting that a Russian mechanized brigade, a formidable force comprising 3,400 combat soldiers and an array of 89 armored and soft-skinned vehicles, embarked on a tactical march. Their objective: a 40-kilometer transit from their reserve positions to forward assembly areas. The chosen route, however, traversed open terrain, offering virtually no natural cover. Russian strategists, in their assessment, deemed the risk acceptable, banking on robust air defense coverage and an anticipated transit time of merely 3 hours. This calculation, as events would soon prove, was catastrophically flawed. Barely 2 hours and 17 minutes into this seemingly routine maneuver, the brigade's fate was sealed with brutal finality. What began as a calculated movement culminated in an almost complete annihilation. 89 vehicles, the very sinews of their mechanized might, were obliterated. A staggering 2,789 soldiers were either killed or grievously wounded, their lives irrevocably altered or extinguished. The few survivors, scattered across an 8-square-kilometer killing field, bore witness to a horrifying spectacle of artillery warfare executed with industrial precision, leaving them profoundly traumatized. Days later, the grim aftermath persisted. The battlefield remained a desolate expanse, strewn with the skeletal remains of destroyed vehicles. Under the watchful eyes of international observers, the painstaking and somber task of body recovery continued, a testament to the scale of the devastation. The strategic ramifications of this incident were, and continue to be, meticulously calculated, reverberating far beyond the immediate tactical loss. This narrative delves into the precise sequence of events that transpired during those fateful 2 hours and 17 minutes. Tactical road marches are, by their very nature, fundamental and routine military operations. They involve the systematic movement of units from one geographical point to another, utilizing established roads and cross-country pathways. Such movements are meticulously planned with a tripartite objective: to minimize exposure to hostile forces, to maximize the speed of transit, and crucially, to maintain the operational cohesion of the unit. Russian forces, prior to this particular engagement, had executed scores of similar marches over many months, largely without significant incident, fostering a sense of operational normalcy and perhaps a degree of complacency. This specific march was conceived as a straightforward logistical exercise. The brigade was to traverse 40 kilometers through what were considered relatively secure rear areas, ultimately reaching their designated forward positions. Extensive route reconnaissance had been undertaken, and security elements were deployed to screen the movement, providing an outer layer of protection. Furthermore, sophisticated air defense systems were intended to offer a protective umbrella against any potential aerial threats, reinforcing the perceived security of the operation. However, the critical miscalculation in Russian planning lay in their profound underestimation of Ukraine's burgeoning long-range artillery capabilities and their highly effective reconnaissance network. Unbeknownst to the Russian command, Ukrainian forces had been assiduously tracking Russian troop movements across this particular sector for weeks on end. Every march, every convoy, every subtle rotation of units was meticulously observed, catalogued, and analyzed. A network of Ukrainian reconnaissance drones, operating at high altitudes and possessing extended endurance, maintained an almost constant, pervasive surveillance over Russian rear areas. These aerial sentinels, virtually invisible to the Russian air defense systems of the time, provided an uninterrupted stream of critical intelligence regarding enemy movements. The moment the Russian brigade commenced its departure at 1300 hours, Ukrainian reconnaissance assets immediately detected and confirmed the movement. On-ground observers, working in conjunction with their aerial counterparts, diligently tracked the march's progress, precisely identified its intended route, and accurately calculated the timing of its advance. This invaluable real-time intelligence was then instantaneously relayed to the Ukrainian Artillery Command. The Ukrainian artillery forces deployed in this sector commanded a formidable arsenal of multiple long-range systems. This included American M777 towed howitzers, Polish Krab self-propelled guns, French Caesar self-propelled howitzers, and the highly effective M142 HIMARS multiple rocket launchers. These diverse systems, strategically positioned between 15 and 40 kilometers from the Russian march route, collectively provided an overlapping and comprehensive coverage of the entire engagement area. With this detailed intelligence, the Ukrainian Artillery Command identified an optimal engagement zone along the Russian route. This was an 8-kilometer section of completely open farmland, devoid of any natural cover or concealment. The fields, having been harvested months prior, offered no vegetation taller than mere stubble. There were no forests, no man-made structures, and no discernible terrain features that could offer even a modicum of protection. It was, in essence, a perfectly flat, exposed expanse. The Ukrainian operational plan was elegantly simple in its brutal efficiency: patiently await the Russian brigade's full entry into this designated kill zone, and then unleash a sustained artillery bombardment with maximum firepower until the entire formation was utterly destroyed. This engagement was designed not merely as a defensive action, but as a stark demonstration of the devastating lethality of modern artillery when brought to bear against exposed and vulnerable forces. For the first hour, the Russian march proceeded with an unsettling normalcy. The columns of vehicles stretched across an impressive 11 kilometers, maintaining their regulation spacing, a picture of disciplined military movement. The lead elements consisted of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles, spearheading the advance. The central portion of the column housed critical command vehicles and artillery assets, while the trail elements comprised essential logistics trucks and recovery vehicles. At precisely 1400 hours, the brigade's vanguard elements breached the threshold of the designated kill zone. The column, oblivious to the impending catastrophe, continued its inexorable advance, unaware that Ukrainian artillery batteries were receiving continuous real-time targeting updates from the silent, unseen reconnaissance drones hovering high above. The Ukrainian Artillery Command exercised remarkable patience. They waited, allowing more and more of the Russian column to enter the kill zone. With each passing minute, the target array grew denser, presenting an increasingly lucrative opportunity. By 1430 hours, the vast majority of the brigade was fully enveloped within the 8-kilometer engagement area. Then, at 1447 hours, the Ukrainian artillery commenced its devastating barrage. 6 separate artillery batteries, collectively fielding 36 tubes, initiated a perfectly coordinated fire mission. These batteries were strategically dispersed across different locations, firing from various azimuths, thereby creating a lethal interlocking pattern of fire across the entire kill zone. The fire missions themselves were meticulously controlled by drone observers who provided instantaneous, real-time targeting corrections, ensuring pinpoint accuracy. The initial salvo was precisely aimed at fuel and ammunition vehicles, which had been identified and tracked through continuous drone surveillance. These critical vehicles, typically positioned in the column's center for perceived protection, instantly became priority targets. The strategic objective was clear. Destroying these logistics vehicles would effectively immobilize the entire brigade, thereby eliminating its capacity to maneuver out of the kill zone. At 1448 hours, the first artillery rounds impacted with thunderous force. High explosive rounds detonated amidst the Russian vehicles, unleashing a maelstrom of destruction. A fuel truck, laden with diesel for the armored vehicles, suffered a direct hit. The ensuing explosion ruptured its tank, spewing burning fuel across the road, engulfing adjacent vehicles in an inferno. Simultaneously, an ammunition truck was struck, resulting in a catastrophic secondary explosion. Thousands of artillery rounds detonated in sympathetic explosions, creating a concussive blast that instantly killed everyone within a 50-meter radius and inflicted severe damage on vehicles up to 200 meters away. Russian command, now acutely aware they were under a sustained artillery attack, initiated standard procedure. Immediate dispersal to minimize target density. Vehicles began to veer off the main road, desperately attempting to spread out across the open farmland in a bid to reduce their vulnerability to the relentless bombardment. This maneuver, while typically a sound tactical response in other contexts, proved utterly disastrous in the completely exposed terrain. Vehicles dispersing from the road instantly transformed into individual, isolated targets, easily identified and engaged by the drone-directed artillery. Ukrainian batteries swiftly shifted their focus to area suppression fires. Instead of targeting specific vehicles, they saturated entire zones where Russian forces were observed to be concentrating. The rate of artillery fire was relentless, averaging approximately 300 rounds per hour across all batteries, translating to a staggering 5 rounds per minute, impacting the 8-kilometer kill zone. The bombardment was unceasing, a relentless torrent of destruction. Every 12 seconds, another artillery round detonated somewhere within the kill zone. There was no sanctuary, no cover, no conceivable escape. Russian soldiers endured continuous explosions for over 2 agonizing hours. At 1500 hours, Ukrainian forces escalated their assault, committing HIMARS systems to the fray. 6 rockets were precisely fired at identified command vehicles, which had been meticulously tracked by reconnaissance drones. The strikes were surgical in their precision. All 6 command vehicles were utterly destroyed within a mere 90 seconds. With this devastating blow, the brigade's command and control capability was effectively decapitated. Bereft of a functioning command structure, the brigade rapidly fragmented into isolated, disoriented units, each acting independently and without coordination. Some, in a desperate and futile attempt, tried to continue the march. Others halted, seeking whatever meager cover they could find in shallow ditches. Many, in sheer desperation, abandoned their vehicles and fled on foot across the open fields. Russian air defense systems, in a desperate counter-effort, attempted to engage the Ukrainian reconnaissance drones that were so effectively directing the artillery fires. However, the drones were operating at altitudes that exceeded the effective engagement range of man-portable air defense systems. Long-range air defense batteries that possessed the capability to reach these high-flying drones were positioned too far away to render any meaningful assistance. Russian artillery, in a belated and largely ineffective response, attempted counter-battery fire against the Ukrainian gun positions. Russian counter-battery radar systems did detect Ukrainian firing positions and transmitted their coordinates. Russian guns engaged, but the Ukrainian artillery crews, employing a highly effective technique known as shoot and scoot, displaced immediately after firing. By the time Russian counter-battery rounds arrived at the detected positions, the Ukrainian guns had already moved to alternate firing locations, rendering the Russian efforts futile. The artillery duel was unequivocally a one-sided affair. Ukrainian fires continued with sustained and devastating intensity, while Russian counter-battery efforts proved utterly ineffective. The Ukrainian guns remained operational and lethal, systematically dismantling the Russian forces trapped within the kill zone. By 1530, a critical turning point was reached. All Russian fuel trucks had been destroyed. Armored vehicles, attempting desperate maneuvers, began to run out of fuel. Tanks, once formidable, ground to a halt in open fields as their fuel tanks emptied, becoming inert metal hulks. Infantry fighting vehicles, similarly immobilized, were transformed into useless metal boxes, their offensive capabilities nullified. Russian soldiers, dismounting from their now useless vehicles, desperately sought cover. In the utterly flat, featureless farmland, they resorted to digging hasty fighting positions in the frozen soil. These shallow scrapes offered only minimal protection against the air-bursting artillery rounds that rained down upon them. Ukrainian artillery, adapting its tactics, shifted to mixed munitions. High-explosive rounds were directed at vehicles and any discernible structures. Time-delayed fuses were employed for airburst effects, specifically targeting personnel in the open. Smoke rounds were also deployed, maintaining continuous obscuration, thereby preventing Russian forces from effectively observing their dire situation or coordinating any meaningful response. The psychological impact of this relentless, unseen bombardment was devastating. Russian soldiers endured hours of continuous explosions, unable to return effective fire or even glimpse their attackers. Death descended from the sky without warning, delivered by invisible guns positioned 20 to 30 kilometers away. At 1600 hours, a desperate attempt at medical evacuation was launched. Helicopters, specifically two Mi-8s, tried to reach the beleaguered brigade. However, Ukrainian reconnaissance, ever vigilant, detected the approaching helicopters and swiftly directed air defense teams. One helicopter was engaged with a man-portable missile, forcing it to abort its mission. The second managed a brief landing, but came under immediate artillery fire, compelling it to evacuate without loading any casualties. Medical evacuation by air proved impossible. Ground evacuation, under continuous artillery fire, was equally impractical. Wounded soldiers lay in the open fields, awaiting treatment that could not reach them. Many succumbed to wounds that, under normal circumstances and with prompt medical care, would have been survivable. Russian Higher Command, facing an undeniable catastrophe, issued an order for the brigade to withdraw at 1620 hours. Units were instructed to break contact and return to their departure positions. This order, however, was almost impossible to execute. The vast majority of vehicles were either destroyed or immobilized. Communications were severely disrupted, and the command structure was shattered, with many officers killed or wounded. Some isolated units, in a testament to their training, attempted an organized withdrawal. But these movements were tracked by Ukrainian artillery and engaged, leading to the destruction of additional vehicles. Other soldiers, abandoning all hope of organized retreat, fled on foot across the farmland. These groups too were targeted by artillery, with rounds detonating among the exposed infantry, killing and wounding dozens. In a final act of desperation, some soldiers surrendered, raising white flags and awaiting collection by Ukrainian forces. By 1700 hours, all organized Russian resistance had ceased. The brigade was, by all operational definitions, combat ineffective. Survivors were scattered, hiding in shallow ditches or in designated surrender positions. The 8-kilometer stretch of farmland was now a graveyard of destroyed and burning vehicles. Ukrainian artillery continued its relentless barrage until 1730 hours, ensuring the complete destruction of any remaining functional vehicles. The final bombardment specifically targeted any vehicle that showed even the slightest sign of mobility or communication activity. When the artillery fires finally ceased, an eerie silence descended upon the battlefield, broken only by the crackling of burning vehicles and the pained cries of the wounded calling for help. Ukrainian forces cautiously advanced, securing the area and processing the prisoners. The casualty assessment was, as anticipated, catastrophic. Out of the brigade's original 3,400 soldiers, 2,689 were either killed or wounded. A confirmed 611 lay dead on the battlefield, while 2,178 were wounded, many critically. Only 601 soldiers escaped without injury. Every single vehicle in the brigade was either destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. This amounted to a total loss of 89 vehicles, including 34 tanks, 41 infantry fighting vehicles, and 14 artillery pieces, alongside numerous logistics trucks. The equipment loss alone exceeded $712 million. However, these material costs, staggering as they were, profoundly understated the strategic impact of the engagement. The brigade had been earmarked for offensive operations, and its annihilation removed a significant formation from Russian strategic planning. Reconstituting such a unit would demand an arduous 6 to 12 months of personnel replacement, equipment delivery, and intensive training. The tactical lessons gleaned from this disaster were devastating for established Russian military doctrine. Road marches through open terrain, when conducted against an adversary possessing long-range artillery and sophisticated reconnaissance capabilities, were unequivocally suicidal. The brigade possessed no realistic defense against fires delivered from positions 30 kilometers away under continuous drone observation. In stark contrast, Ukrainian artillery doctrine demonstrated a highly sophisticated integration of reconnaissance and fires. Continuous drone surveillance provided precise targeting data. Multiple artillery systems delivered sustained and overwhelming fires. Crucially, the mobility of Ukrainian artillery units enabled their survival against Russian counter-battery attempts. This combination proved lethally effective. The economic efficiency of the Ukrainian operation was stark. The artillery ammunition expended during the engagement cost approximately $2 million. This expenditure resulted in the destruction of $712 million worth of Russian equipment. The cost-exchange ratio overwhelmingly favored Ukraine by more than 300 to 1. The psychological impact on Russian forces was equally severe. Soldiers and other units quickly learned that seemingly routine marches could transform into death traps. Open terrain, once considered safe, could become a killing field under the relentless barrage of artillery. Trust in the security of movement was utterly shattered. Russian military analysts published harsh and unsparing assessments of the incident. One prominent channel wrote, "We moved an entire brigade across open terrain in daylight against an enemy with long-range artillery and drones. This is tactical insanity. We created perfect conditions for our own destruction." Families of the casualties, grappling with immense loss, demanded accountability. Questions mounted. Why was the brigade moved through such exposed terrain? Why was air defense so woefully inadequate? Why couldn't the wounded be evacuated? These poignant and unanswerable questions quickly escalated into significant political problems for the military leadership, eroding public trust and confidence. International observers meticulously documented the battlefield. Teams from the United Nations were dispatched to verify casualty reports and assess compliance with humanitarian law. Their investigations uncovered compelling evidence of a sustained artillery bombardment lasting over 2 hours directed against exposed forces. Days after the engagement, the battle area remained visibly scarred by the wreckage of destroyed vehicles, burned-out tanks, shattered infantry fighting vehicles, and overturned logistics trucks stretched across 8 kilometers. A stark and undeniable testament to the destructive power of modern artillery. Ukrainian forces, in a powerful display of transparency and strategic communication, released drone footage of the entire engagement. Hours of video depicted the Russian column entering the kill zone, the initial devastating artillery strikes, the desperate attempts of vehicles to disperse, the relentless, sustained bombardment, and the ultimate, complete destruction of the formation. This footage served not only as irrefutable documentary evidence, but also as invaluable training material for future engagements. The incident underscored an urgent and undeniable need for a fundamental revision of Russian military doctrine. Movement procedures through open terrain must now explicitly account for pervasive drone surveillance and the threat of long-range precision fires. Route selection, prioritizing natural cover and concealment, becomes not merely advisable, but absolutely critical. Furthermore, timing operations to exploit conditions of reduced visibility, such as night or adverse weather, may become an essential tactical imperative. The numbers alone paint a grim picture of the disaster. 89 vehicles utterly destroyed, 2,189 casualties, including 611 dead. 2 hours and 17 minutes of sustained, merciless bombardment. A staggering $712 million in material losses. This was not the artillery warfare of old, characterized by massed guns firing indiscriminate barrages at broad area targets. This was modern artillery warfare. Precision fires, meticulously directed by real-time intelligence against tracked formations. It was not a brief, overwhelming assault, but a sustained, methodical application of firepower that systematically dismantled and destroyed everything within the engagement area. The farmland, once fertile, is now cratered and burned. The vehicles, once symbols of military might, are twisted, unrecognizable metal. The bodies of the fallen await their final burial, and Russian forces have learned a brutal, indelible lesson. Open terrain is no longer neutral ground. It is, against an enemy armed with sophisticated artillery and ubiquitous drones, a death sentence. Welcome to a new era of warfare, where movement itself can become suicide, where open ground transforms into a killing field and where 2 hours of relentless artillery fire can convert a combat brigade into a mere casualty list. This is the stark reality of contemporary conflict.